Pretty hard question to answer because anything I can tell you, I mean, if I say yes, it sounds like I'm bragging. If I say no, I'm lying.
After 47 years of silence, Elvis Presley's inner circle is finally breaking their vow of secrecy. The bodyguards, maids, musicians, and family members who witnessed his final years at Graceland are now revealing earth-shattering secrets as they face their own mortality. These aren't tabloid rumors, they're deathbed confessions from people who lived with Elvis daily. Red West, his childhood friend and bodyguard, shared secrets before dying in 2017. Sonny West, his cousin and security chief, did the same in 2020. Even Priscilla has begun dropping hints that there's more to Elvis's story than the public knows. The Presley estate has desperately fought to bury these revelations through lawsuits, hush money, and threats, protecting Elvis's carefully crafted image as America's innocent rock and roll king. But dying witnesses decided the truth mattered more than their promises of silence. These documented confessions reveal that Elvis's supposed protectors were actually his enablers and exploiters. The people closest to him, those fans trusted most, were orchestrating the biggest cover-up in music history. What's emerging will fundamentally change how the world sees not just Elvis, but everyone who surrounded and ultimately failed the king of rock and roll. Secret number one is going to destroy everything you thought you knew about Elvis Presley's relationship with his own father. And I'm warning you right now, what Vernon Presley was doing behind closed doors makes him one of the most despicable fathers in music history. But before we get there, you need to understand something. The 10 secrets you're about to hear aren't tabloid rumors. They're deathbed confessions from the people who were actually there. Red West, Elvis's bodyguard, confided these details before he died in 2017. Sonny West did the same in 2020. Even some family members, knowing their time was up, finally decided the truth mattered more than protecting a lie. The Presley estate has spent millions trying to bury these revelations. They've threatened lawsuits, paid hush money, and silenced witnesses for 47 years. But here's the thing about secrets. When the people carrying them start dying, the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. So let's start with secret number one, because it sets the stage for everything that comes after. Vernon Presley wasn't just Elvis's father, he was his financial parasite. While Elvis was working himself to death performing, Vernon was systematically stealing from his own son in ways that would make your blood boil. Here's what the inner circle finally revealed. Vernon had been forging Elvis's signature on checks for years. Not small amounts, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money that Elvis thought was going to charity, to family members in need, to investments for his future. Instead, Vernon was funneling it into secret bank accounts that Elvis never knew existed. But it gets worse. Vernon was also selling Elvis's personal belongings behind his back. Guitars, jewelry, even clothes Elvis had worn on stage. He'd wait until Elvis was on tour, then quietly auction off pieces of his son's life to private collectors. When Elvis would ask about missing items, Vernon would lie straight to his face, claiming they'd been lost or stolen. The most disgusting part, Vernon was using Elvis's generosity against him. Elvis was famous for giving away cars, houses, jewelry to friends and strangers alike. It was part of his nature. He couldn't stand to see people struggle when he had so much. But Vernon would intercept these gifts before they reached their intended recipients and sell them instead. People Elvis thought he was helping never received a thing, while Vernon pocketed the cash. Red West confirmed this in his final interview before he died. He said he'd watched Vernon manipulate Elvis for years, always with some sob story about needing money for this or that emergency. And Elvis, being the loyal son he was, would hand over whatever Vernon asked for without question. He trusted his father completely, even as Vernon was bleeding him dry. Here's the kicker. Vernon wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing Elvis's peace of mind. Every time Elvis felt generous, Every time he wanted to help someone, Vernon was there, turning that kindness into profit. Elvis died thinking he was a good person who helped people. He never knew that most of his attempts at generosity were being stolen by the one person he trusted most. This wasn't just theft, it was the systematic destruction of Elvis's soul by his own father. And it explains so much about why Elvis became increasingly paranoid and isolated in his final years. Deep down, he sensed something was wrong, but he could never imagine that his own father was the one betraying him. But Vernon's financial manipulation was just the beginning, because secret number 2 reveals how Elvis's prescription drug addiction wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated by people who were supposed to protect him. And when you hear the names of the people involved and how much money they were making off Elvis's suffering, you're going to be absolutely furious. Secret number 2 gets even darker, and it explains how Elvis became so dependent on prescription drugs. It wasn't just one doctor. It wasn't just Dr. Nick. Elvis had an entire network of physicians across 3 states who were writing him prescriptions, and they were all being coordinated by someone you trusted. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager and supposed best friend, was running what amounted to a pharmaceutical operation. He had connections with doctors in Memphis, Nashville, and Las Vegas. When one doctor would cut Elvis off, Joe would drive him to another state to see a different physician. When that doctor got suspicious, they'd fly to Las Vegas.
But Joe wasn't doing this out of loyalty. He was taking a cut. Every prescription filled, Joe got paid by the pharmaceutical companies for volume referrals. He turned Elvis's addiction into his own personal business. And when Elvis would try to get clean, Joe would convince him that he needed the pills for his performances, for his back pain, for his anxiety. Joe Esposito made over $400,000 between 1974 and 1977, just from kickbacks on Elvis's prescriptions. Secret number 3 is going to change everything you thought you knew about what was happening at Graceland during those final years. Elvis wasn't just taking pills and eating sandwiches. He was completely obsessed with the paranormal, and he was holding seances in the basement of Graceland almost every week. Larry Geller, Elvis's spiritual advisor, has finally admitted that Elvis was trying to communicate with his dead twin brother Jesse. But it wasn't just innocent curiosity. Elvis genuinely believed that Jesse was trying to warn him about something. He would spend hours in the basement with candles, Ouija boards, and mediums he flew in from all over the country. And here's what makes this terrifying. Elvis started making decisions based on what he thought Jesse was telling him, who to trust, who to fire, even what songs to record. The people around him thought he was losing his mind, but they played along because the alternative was losing access to his money. Priscilla knew about the seances. She participated in some of them, but she's never admitted publicly that Elvis's final years were being guided by what he believed were messages from his dead brother. Secret number 4 is the most explosive of all, because it involves evidence that still exists today. Elvis was secretly recording conversations at Graceland, and those tapes are still out there. Starting in 1975, Elvis had recording equipment installed throughout Graceland, not just in his bedroom, but in the kitchen, the living room, even the office where Vernon handled his finances. Elvis was paranoid that people were plotting against him, and he was right. Those tapes captured everything. Vernon and Colonel Parker discussing how to hide money from Elvis, Joe Esposito on the phone with drug dealers, Priscilla talking to her divorce attorney about how to maximize her settlement. But the most damaging conversations involved Elvis himself. Him admitting that he knew people were stealing from him, but feeling too weak to stop it. Him talking about ending his life because he couldn't trust anyone. Him begging people to help him get clean while they're literally handing him pills. 3 of those tapes were turned over to Priscilla after Elvis died. She's had them for 47 years. The other 12 tapes? They're still hidden somewhere in Graceland, and whoever finds them is going to have the power to destroy multiple reputations. But if you think secrets 1 through 4 are shocking, wait until you hear what the people you trusted most were doing behind Elvis's back. Secret number 5 is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, because it involves someone who pretended to be Elvis's friend while secretly planning to destroy him. James Burton, Elvis's lead guitarist, and someone the world saw as devoted to the king, was writing a tell-all book throughout the entire 1970s. But he wasn't just writing it. He was actively recording conversations with Elvis without his knowledge. Burton had a small recording device that he would hide in his guitar case during rehearsals, in hotel rooms, even during private conversations at Graceland. The book was going to be called The Real King, and it was going to expose everything. Elvis's drug use, his violent outbursts, his sexual relationships, even his financial problems. Burton had a deal with a major publisher worth over $300,000, which was massive money in 1976. He was planning to release it the moment Elvis died, or if their professional relationship ended. But here's the most disgusting part. Burton would encourage Elvis to open up about his problems, pretending to be a supportive friend, all while recording every word for his book. When Elvis would talk about his fears, his insecurities, his family problems, Burton saw dollar signs. The manuscript still exists, and it's filled with Elvis's most private confessions, recorded without his knowledge by someone he trusted completely. Secret number 6 explains why Priscilla really left Elvis, and it has nothing to do with the official story you've been told about growing apart or his infidelity. The truth is far more disturbing. On March 12, 1972, Elvis physically attacked Priscilla during an argument about money. Not a push, not a shove. He beat her so badly that she had to be taken to a private doctor to avoid questions. The incident was witnessed by 3 people: Charlie Hodge, Sonny West, and Elvis's cousin Billy Smith. All 3 were paid to keep quiet, but that wasn't the worst part. The attack happened in front of Lisa Marie, who was only 4 years old at the time. Priscilla later told her divorce attorney that Lisa Marie still had nightmares about seeing her father hurt her mother. That's why Priscilla fought so hard for custody, not because of Elvis's lifestyle, but because she genuinely feared for her daughter's safety. The 3 witnesses were each paid $25,000 to never speak about what they saw. But Sonny West, before his death, finally admitted to his own family what really happened that night. He said it was the most shameful thing he'd ever been part of, not just witnessing the attack, but taking money to cover it up.
Secret number 7 reveals the true extent of Colonel Parker's theft, and the numbers are going to make you sick. Everyone knows Parker was taking 50% of Elvis's earnings, but that was just the beginning. Parker had secret agreements with venues where he would get additional kickbacks for booking Elvis. He was getting paid by the hotels in Las Vegas, by the television networks, even by the pharmaceutical companies that were supplying Elvis's drugs. Between 1970 and 1977, Parker made over $8 million from deals that Elvis knew nothing about. But the most disgusting scheme involved Elvis's merchandise. Parker set up a separate company that owned the rights to Elvis's image and likeness. Every t-shirt, every poster, every piece of memorabilia sold, Parker was getting 70%, while Elvis got 30%. Elvis thought he owned his own image, but legally, Parker controlled it all. When Elvis tried to fire Parker in 1976, Parker showed him the contracts and explained that if Elvis left, he would owe Parker over $4 million in penalties. Elvis was trapped by his own manager, financially imprisoned by the man who was supposed to protect his interests. Secret number 8 is the most terrifying of all because it involves death threats that Elvis received in his final year, and the person making those threats was someone inside his own organization. Between January and July 1977, Elvis received 12 death threats. The FBI investigated, but they never found the source. That's because the person making the threats had access to Graceland, knew Elvis's schedule, and was using inside information to make the threats seem credible. The person sending those threats was Dr. George Nicopolis, Dr. Nick himself. He was threatening Elvis's life as a way to make him more dependent on medication for anxiety and paranoia. Every time Elvis would try to reduce his pill intake, another death threat would arrive, sending him spiraling back into fear and drug dependence. But the final two secrets are so explosive, they involve evidence that was destroyed and cover-ups that went all the way to the top of law enforcement. Secret number 9 is going to haunt you because it involves Elvis's final phone call, and what he said changes everything about how he died. At 11:47 p.m. on August 15, 1977, less than 14 hours before he was found dead, Elvis made a phone call. The official story is that he called his dentist about a tooth problem. That's a lie. Elvis called his spiritual advisor, Larry Geller, and the conversation lasted 43 minutes.
Larry kept quiet about this call for over 30 years. But in 2008, dying of cancer, he finally revealed what Elvis said that night. Elvis told Larry that he couldn't take it anymore. The betrayals, the stealing, the people around him who pretended to love him while destroying him. He was done. But most importantly, Elvis said he had figured out a way to make it look natural so that Lisa Marie would never have to know the truth. Elvis spent that final phone call explaining to Larry that he had been stockpiling pills for months, not to get high, but to have enough to end his life in a way that would look like an accidental overdose. He said he couldn't bear the thought of Lisa Marie growing up knowing her father committed suicide. So, he was going to make it appear like he just took too many pills by mistake. Larry begged Elvis not to do it. He stayed on the phone until almost 1 a.m., trying to talk him out of it. But Elvis's final words to Larry were, "I've already made my peace with God. Tell Lisa Marie I love her when she's old enough to understand." The phone records from that night were confiscated by Memphis police within hours of Elvis's death. They've never been released. Larry's testimony was never taken officially. And when Larry tried to tell investigators about the call, he was told to keep quiet for the family's sake. But secret number 10 is the most devastating of all, because it reveals a cover-up so massive that it involved destroying evidence and silencing witnesses to protect not just Elvis's reputation, but the reputations of everyone who failed him. Within 6 hours of Elvis being declared dead, Colonel Parker arrived at Graceland with 2 Memphis police detectives and began removing evidence from the scene. They weren't looking for clues about how Elvis died. They were destroying anything that could expose the network of people who had been enabling his drug use and stealing from him. The most shocking part is what they found in Elvis's bedroom safe. A suicide note, written in Elvis's handwriting, dated August 15, 1977. But now you know the truth, all of it. And once you know the truth about Elvis Presley, you can never see his story the same way again. If these revelations shocked you, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started. Next week, we're exposing the dark secrets behind Michael Jackson's final days that his family never wanted revealed. Ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.
Honey, I just seem to keep my own personal views about that to myself. I'm just an entertainer, and I'd rather not. Well, the image is one thing, and a human being is another. You know, it's very hard to live up to an image. I'll put it that way.
June 26, 1977. Indianapolis. A bloated, sweating man in a white jumpsuit stumbles across the stage, barely able to finish his final song. The crowd doesn't know they're watching a dead man walking. Elvis Presley has exactly 51 days left to live, and he's about to close out his last concert
with Can't Help Falling in Love, the same song that made him a legend, now sung by a ghost of himself. But this story doesn't start with his death. It starts with another death, one that happened 42 years earlier, and carved a hole in Elvis's soul that no amount of fame, money, or pills could ever fill. January 8, 1935, Tupelo, Mississippi. Gladys Presley is in agony, giving birth to twins, in a 2-room shotgun house that's barely fit for animals. The first baby comes out blue and silent, dead. Jesse Garon Presley never takes a breath. 30 minutes later, his brother Elvis Aaron enters the world, alone, screaming, and already carrying the weight of being the survivor. You want to know what broke Elvis? It wasn't the fame. It wasn't the Colonel. It wasn't the pills. It was Jesse. Elvis spent his entire life talking to his dead twin brother, convinced he was living for 2 people, carrying double the burden, double the pain. He would tell people that he felt incomplete, like half of him was missing, because half of him was. The Presley family was dirt poor, and I mean Mississippi Delta poor. Vernon Presley was a drifter who couldn't hold a job and eventually got himself thrown in prison for check fraud when Elvis was just 3 years old. While Daddy was behind bars, Gladys and little Elvis lost their home and had to move in with relatives, sleeping on floors, eating scraps, wearing clothes until they fell apart. But here's where it gets really twisted. Gladys became obsessed with Elvis in a way that wasn't healthy. She wouldn't let him out of her sight. She walked him to school every day until he was 15 years old. She made him sleep in her bed. She told him he was special, that he was chosen, that he had to make up for the brother who never lived. She created a mama's boy who would spend his entire life desperately searching for a woman to replace her. The family found refuge in the Assembly of God Church, where young Elvis first heard the gospel music that would shape his sound. But even there, he was an outsider. The other kids made fun of his poverty, his secondhand clothes, his weird obsession with singing and performing. Elvis learned early that being different meant being alone. When he was 11, Elvis begged his parents for a bicycle for his birthday. They couldn't afford it. Instead, they bought him a cheap guitar from Tupelo Hardware for $7.75. Elvis cried. He wanted to be normal. In 1948, when Elvis was 13, the family packed up their few belongings and moved to Memphis. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but it was really just a different kind of hell. They ended up in Lauderdale Courts, a housing project where dreams went to die. Elvis was now a country boy in the big city, still wearing homemade clothes, still sleeping too close to his mama, still talking to his dead brother in the mirror. But Memphis had something Tupelo didn't: Beale Street. This was where Elvis discovered black music, where he heard sounds that made his soul catch fire. He would sneak down to the clubs, this skinny white kid with greasy hair, soaking up blues and gospel like a sponge. The musicians tolerated him because he was harmless, but they had no idea they were witnessing the birth of a cultural earthquake. Elvis graduated from Humes High School in 1953, barely. He was voted most likely to not succeed by his classmates. They saw a weird mama's boy who carried a guitar everywhere and mumbled when he talked. They couldn't see the rage building inside him, the desperate hunger for something more, the need to prove that the boy who lived was worth more than the brother who died. That summer, 18-year-old Elvis walked into Sun Records with $4 in his pocket and a song in his heart. He told the receptionist he wanted to make a recording for his mama's birthday. It was a lie. Gladys's birthday had passed months earlier. Elvis was there for himself, for Jesse, for every kid who ever felt like they didn't belong. Sam Phillips wasn't even there that day, but his assistant Marion Keisker heard something in this nervous kid's voice. She wrote a note, "Good ballad singer, hold." She had no idea she'd just documented the moment when Elvis Presley began his march toward superstardom and his grave. July 1954. That recording session at Sun Records changed everything. And I mean everything. That's All Right hit the airwaves, and suddenly this awkward kid from the projects became the most dangerous man in America. White teenagers were screaming. Parents were horrified. And Elvis Presley had tasted something more addictive than any drug he'd ever encounter: the roar of the crowd. But success in America comes with a price tag. And Elvis was about to meet the man who would collect every penny with interest. Enter Colonel Tom Parker. And let me tell you something about the Colonel. He wasn't a colonel, and he wasn't even American. He was Andreas van Kuik, an illegal immigrant from Holland who reinvented himself as a carnival barker and con man. This was the guy who would control every aspect of Elvis's life for the next 2 decades. And Elvis handed him the keys to his kingdom, like a...
Parker saw Elvis and saw dollar signs. Not an artist, not a human being, a product to be packaged, marketed, and milked until there was nothing left. The Colonel's first move? Get Elvis away from Sam Phillips and Sun Records, the place where his genius was born, and sell him to RCA Victor for $35,000. Elvis got a pink Cadillac. Parker got control of a gold mine. Here's what nobody tells you about Elvis's rise to fame. It was designed to destroy him from day one. Parker didn't want an artist who could think for himself. He wanted a trained SEAL who would perform on command. Every decision was made for Elvis. What songs to record, what movies to make, where to perform, who to date, what to wear, what to say in interviews. Elvis became a prisoner in his own life. And the more successful he became, the more isolated he got. Think about it. By 1956, Elvis couldn't walk down the street without being mobbed. He couldn't go to a restaurant, couldn't go to a movie, couldn't have a normal conversation with another human being. His world shrunk down to a handful of people who all depended on him for their paychecks. Everyone around him had a financial incentive to keep him happy, high, and performing. The army should have been his escape. 2 years in Germany, away from the Colonel, away from the madness. But even there, Elvis was treated like an exotic pet. The other soldiers either worshipped him or resented him. There was no middle ground, no normal friendships, no real human connection. And then his mama died while he was overseas, and something inside Elvis died with her. When he came back from the army in 1960, the world had moved on. The Beatles were coming, rock and roll was evolving, and Elvis was stuck making beach movies and singing to teenagers about puppies and rainbows. The Colonel had turned the most dangerous performer in American history into a neutered cash cow, cranking out 3 movies a year. But here's the really sick part. Elvis knew it was killing him, and he couldn't stop. He was addicted to the approval, addicted to being needed, addicted to being the king. Every terrible movie, every ridiculous song, every humiliating performance was another hit of the drug that was slowly poisoning him. The pills started innocently enough. Diet pills to stay thin for the cameras, sleeping pills to come down from the adrenaline, painkillers for the constant performing. But by the mid-1960s, Elvis was taking handfuls of uppers and downers every day, and everyone around him pretended it was normal because the money kept flowing. Then came 1968, and the comeback special that was supposed to save his career. For one brief shining moment, Elvis remembered who he was. Dressed in black leather, sitting with a guitar, singing like his life depended on it. But instead of using that momentum to break free, to take control of his life, the International Hotel
offered Elvis $1 million to do 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, for months at a time. It should have been called what it was, a golden coffin. Vegas became Elvis's prison, a place where he could perform for the same drunk tourists night after night, while slowly dying inside. The Colonel convinced Elvis this was his comeback, his return to live performing. But Vegas wasn't a comeback. It was a surrender. Every night, Elvis would walk onto that stage knowing he was betraying everything he once stood for, singing the same songs to the same people, trapped in a cycle that was making everyone rich, except the man who was slowly killing himself to maintain it. By 1970, Elvis Presley had become a tragic figure, the most famous entertainer in the world, and the loneliest man alive. In 1973, Elvis Presley is 38 years old and looks like he's 60. The man who once moved like liquid lightning now struggles to get through a single song without gasping for breath. His weight has ballooned to nearly 250 pounds. His face is puffy from steroids and pills, and his hands shake so badly he can barely hold a microphone. But every night, he still puts on that white jumpsuit and walks onto the Vegas stage like a gladiator entering the arena to die. This is what rock and roll royalty looks like when the crown becomes a death sentence. The pills aren't just recreational anymore, they're survival. Elvis is taking uppers to wake up, downers to sleep, painkillers to numb the agony of performing when your body is falling apart, and tranquilizers to stop the panic attacks. His doctor, George Nicopolis, they called him Dr. Nick, is basically a licensed drug dealer with a prescription pad. In the last 2.5 years of Elvis's life, Dr. Nick prescribed him over 10,000 pills. That's 12 pills a day, every single day. But here's the sick truth. Everyone around Elvis is making money off his misery. The Memphis Mafia, his so-called friends and bodyguards, they're all on his payroll. They bring him pills, they cover up his overdoses, they lie to the press, and they watch him slowly kill himself because their mortgages depend on keeping Elvis happy and performing. His marriage to Priscilla crumbled because living with Elvis was like living with a ghost. He'd disappear for days into his bedroom at Graceland, surrounded by pills and junk food, watching TV until his eyes bled. When he did emerge, he was either so high he couldn't function or so paranoid he thought the FBI was watching him through the windows. Priscilla tried to save him, but you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. The divorce in 1973 destroyed what was left of Elvis's heart. He loved Priscilla, but he loved the pills more. After she left, taking their daughter Lisa Marie with her, Elvis spiraled into a darkness that made everything before look like a vacation. He started dating teenage girls because they didn't ask questions, didn't judge him, didn't try to change him. They just worshipped him while he slowly died in front of them. The concerts became freak shows. Some nights Elvis would be so drugged he'd forget the words to his own songs. Other nights he'd ramble incoherently between numbers, telling bizarre stories that made no sense. The audience didn't care. They were there to see the legend, even if the legend was dying right in front of their eyes. In 1973, Elvis overdosed twice. The first time, they found him unconscious in his bathroom, blue and barely breathing. They rushed him to the hospital and pumped his stomach. 3 months later, it happened again. This time, he was in a coma for 3 days. When he woke up, do you know what his first question was? Not, "How's my health?" Not, "Will I be okay?" It was, "When's my next show?" That's addiction. That's what happens when your identity becomes so tangled up in performing that you'd rather die on stage than live as a normal person. His father, Vernon, and his manager, Colonel Parker, knew exactly what was happening. They watched Elvis destroying himself and did nothing because the money was too good. Every concert, every appearance, every terrible decision Elvis made was generating millions of dollars. They had turned Elvis into a human ATM, and as long as he kept dispensing cash, they'd keep feeding him pills. The really heartbreaking part is that Elvis knew what was happening to him. In his lucid moments, he'd beg people to help him get clean. He'd flush pills down the toilet, promise to change, talk about retiring and finding peace. But then the fear would kick in. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being normal, fear of facing himself without the drugs. And he'd go right back to the pills. By 1976, Elvis Presley wasn't a person anymore. He was a brand, a commodity, a machine that turned pills and pain into profit for everyone except the man who was dying to keep it running. August 16, 1977, 2:30 in the afternoon. Ginger Alden walks into the bathroom at Graceland and finds Elvis Presley face down on the floor, his pajama bottoms around his ankles, his body already cold. The king of rock and roll has died on his toilet, reading a book about spirituality, probably hoping to find in those pages what pills could never give him: peace.
But here's what they don't tell you about that day. The first thing Vernon Presley did when he heard his son was dead wasn't grieve, it was damage control. Within hours, the official story was carved in stone: heart attack, probably genetic, nothing suspicious here. The truth? Elvis's blood contained enough drugs to kill a horse. Codeine, morphine, Valium, Placidil, Valmid, and a dozen other pharmaceuticals were coursing through his veins when his heart finally gave up. Dr. Nick, the man who'd been dealing pills to Elvis for years, suddenly became very concerned about his medical reputation. The pill bottles disappeared, the evidence got scrubbed, the autopsy results were sealed for 50 years. They turned Elvis's death into the same thing his life had become: a carefully manufactured lie designed to protect everyone except Elvis himself. The funeral was a circus. Thousands of fans lined the streets of Memphis crying for a man they'd watched kill himself in slow motion for years. But behind the scenes, the vultures were already circling. Colonel Parker, the man who'd controlled Elvis like a puppet for 20 years, didn't shed a single tear. His first words when he heard Elvis was dead? "Nothing has changed. This won't affect any of our plans." Think about that. Elvis wasn't even cold yet, and Parker was already figuring out how to make money off his corpse. And make money he did. Within weeks of Elvis's death, the merchandising machine kicked into overdrive. T-shirts, posters, commemorative plates, tribute albums. Parker turned Elvis's grave into a gold mine. The estate that Elvis left behind was worth about $5 million. Today, 46 years after his death, Elvis Presley Enterprises generates over $100 million a year. Dead Elvis became more profitable than living Elvis ever was. But here's the cruelest irony of all. Elvis's family, the people he'd worked himself to death to support, couldn't handle the money or the fame that came with his legacy. His father, Vernon, died in 1979, broken and guilt-ridden. His ex-wife, Priscilla, turned Graceland into a tourist attraction, charging people money to walk through the rooms where Elvis had slowly died. His daughter, Lisa Marie, inherited everything and promptly lost most of it through bad investments and worse marriages. The same money that killed Elvis kept destroying his family long after he was gone. Lisa Marie died in 2023 at age 54, the same age her father would have been if he'd lived just 12 more years. She spent her entire life trying to escape her father's shadow while depending on his money to survive. The Presley curse claimed another victim. Today, Elvis impersonators outnumber the real thing by thousands to one. Vegas is crawling with fat guys in white jumpsuits, performing for tourists who want to see the king without understanding the tragedy. Elvis has become a joke, a Halloween costume, a punchline about fried peanut butter sandwiches and sequin jumpsuits. But every now and then, someone discovers that 1968 comeback special, or stumbles across That's All Right for the first time. And they remember
What made Elvis dangerous? They hear the pain in his voice, the desperate hunger for something real, the sound of a man trying to sing his way out of hell. Elvis Presley achieved everything he ever wanted: fame, money, immortality. But he lost the only thing that mattered: himself. He became so desperate to be loved by everyone that he forgot how to love himself. His story isn't just about rock and roll. It's about what happens when the American dream becomes the American nightmare. The boy who survived when his twin brother died spent his whole life trying to live for two people. In the end, he couldn't even live for one. If this story hit you as hard as it hit me, smash that like button and subscribe for more untold celebrity tragedies. What other rock legends lived tragic lives behind the fame? Drop your suggestions in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.
He was a good winner, but sometimes a sore loser. Elvis wants to see you in the dressing room. I said, oh no, here we go. I just knew he was gonna come down on that guitar.
For 47 years, James Burton carried a secret that could have destroyed Elvis Presley's legacy. But at 85, after surviving a stroke, COVID, cancer, and a broken hip, Burton finally realized something that changed everything. The truth doesn't die with you. It haunts the people you leave behind. That last tour should have been canceled, Burton says, his voice breaking after decades of silence. I watched Elvis pushing himself when he could barely stand, but nobody wanted to hear it. There was too much money at stake. June 1977. Elvis was 3 months away from death, but nobody knew it yet. Burton was watching his friend and bandmate deteriorating night after night, show after show. The man who once commanded stages with godlike presence was now struggling to remember lyrics, sweating through costumes and relying on prescription pills just to make it through each performance. He pulled me aside in Indianapolis, that final show, and said something I've never told anyone. Burton reveals, Elvis grabbed my arm, looked me dead in the eye, and whispered, James, I don't think I can do this anymore. Not the tour, not just the music, everything. He was talking about living. That moment shattered Burton's world. Here was Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, admitting defeat to his guitarist in a backstage corridor, while thousands of fans screamed his name just yards away. But what Burton discovered next was even worse. Elvis had been saying this to people for months, and everyone ignored him. Colonel Parker brushed it off. The Memphis Mafia laughed it off. They'd say, that's just Elvis being dramatic. But I was there every night. I saw him stumble. I heard him forget words to songs he'd sung 1,000 times. I watched him take pills just to walk to the microphone. Burton's loyalty to Elvis ran deeper than music. They weren't just performer and sideman. They were friends who shared late-night conversations about life, family, and the crushing weight of fame. Elvis trusted Burton with thoughts he couldn't share with anyone else, including his growing terror about what his life had become. Elvis told me he felt like a prisoner in his own body, Burton says, his voice heavy with emotion. He said the pills weren't helping anymore, but he couldn't stop taking them because the pain, physical and emotional, was too much. He asked me once if I thought people would still love him if they knew the truth. The truth was devastating. Elvis Presley, the man who revolutionized American music, was drowning in prescription drugs, surrounded by people who enabled his addiction because his misery made them rich. Burton watched it happen and felt powerless to stop it. I tried talking to people around him. The phone call that changed Burton's life forever came on August 16, 1977. He was back home in Shreveport when someone from Graceland called with news that would shatter him. Elvis was dead. Burton's first thought wasn't grief, it was guilt. I should have done more, Burton admits. I should have refused to play that last tour. I should have called the newspapers, the police, somebody. But I was just the guitar player, right? Who would have listened to me? For decades, Burton convinced himself that staying silent was honoring Elvis's memory. He gave interviews praising the king, sharing happy stories, protecting the legend. But recently, Burton realized he wasn't protecting Elvis. He was protecting the people who failed him. Elvis died because nobody had the courage to tell him no, Burton says. Not the Colonel, not his family, not his friends. We all failed him, and I've spent 47 years lying about it. Burton's decision to finally speak isn't about revenge or settling scores. It's about a dying man's desperate need to tell the truth before it's too late. At 85, having survived his own brush with death, Burton understands something he didn't at 38. Secrets don't honor the dead. They dishonor the living. Elvis deserves better than the lies we've been telling, Burton says. He was a good man who got lost in a bad situation, and the people who could have saved him chose money over his life. But Burton's revelations about that final tour are just the beginning. What he's about to expose about those famous stage moments, the times when Elvis would turn to him and shout, "Play it, James," will change everything you thought you knew about the king of rock and roll. Everyone remembers those electrifying moments when Elvis would spin around on stage, point at James Burton, and shout, "Play it, James." The crowds went wild. The cameras captured magic. But Burton is finally revealing what those moments really meant, and it's nothing like what the world believed. Those weren't showmanship moments, Burton confesses. Half the time Elvis was signaling me because he was in trouble. He'd forget lyrics, lose his place in a song, or just freeze up from the pills. "Play it, James" became his way of buying time while he tried to get his head together. Burton's revelation destroys one of Elvis's most iconic stage traditions. What fans saw as spontaneous rock and roll electricity was actually a desperate man using his guitarist as a lifeline. The longer Burton played, the more time Elvis had to remember where he was and what he was supposed to be doing. "I could tell the difference," Burton explains. "When Elvis genuinely wanted me to solo, his eyes would light up. He'd smile, move with the music. But when he was in trouble, he'd look panicked. His voice would crack when he said my name. I learned to stretch those solos as long as possible." The most devastating part wasn't Elvis's struggles. It was watching the people around him exploit those struggles for profit. Burton witnessed conversations that still make his stomach turn. Discussions about Elvis's condition that prioritized ticket sales over human decency. I heard Colonel Parker tell someone, "The worse Elvis gets, the more tickets we sell. People want to see the train wreck." That man was talking about my friend like he was a circus act. And Elvis knew it. Burton reveals that Elvis was painfully aware of how his deteriorating condition was being marketed. The slurred speech, the forgotten lyrics, the visible struggles, they became selling points. Promoters advertised concerts with phrases like, "See Elvis one last time," and "Witness history in the making," turning Elvis's pain into profit. Elvis came to me one night in tears, Burton remembers. He said, "James, they're betting on when I'm going to die. My own people are making money off my misery." He felt like a wounded animal being paraded around for entertainment. The manipulation went deeper than anyone realized. Burton exposes how Elvis's inner circle, the famous Memphis Mafia, had divided into factions. Some genuinely cared about Elvis's well-being, but others had financial interests in keeping him performing regardless of his condition. There were guys around Elvis who owed their entire lifestyle to his success, Burton reveals. Houses, cars, families, all paid for by Elvis's work. When he talked about retiring or getting clean, suddenly these people would find reasons why he needed to keep touring. They'd guilt him, manipulate him, whatever it took. Burton describes the most heartbreaking conversation he ever had with Elvis, backstage in 1976. Elvis had just finished a show where he'd forgotten the words to "Love Me Tender," a song he'd sung thousands of times. The crowd didn't seem to notice, but Elvis was devastated. He grabbed my shoulders and said, "James, I'm losing myself up there. I don't know who I am anymore." Then he asked me something that still haunts me. Do you think they'd still love me if I was just Elvis, not the king? That question revealed the trap Elvis felt caught in. He wasn't just struggling with addiction. He was struggling with an identity that had become his prison. The world demanded the king, but Elvis the man was disappearing. Burton also exposes the gift-giving that everyone interpreted as Elvis's legendary generosity. While Elvis was genuinely generous, Burton reveals that many of those famous gifts, cars, jewelry, money, were actually apologies. After bad shows, Elvis would go on spending sprees, Burton explains. He'd buy everyone expensive gifts, but he'd always say the same thing. "I'm sorry you had to see me like that." He was apologizing for being human, for struggling, for not being the perfect king everyone expected.
The pink paisley Telecaster that became Burton's trademark? It wasn't just a guitar Elvis admired. It was Elvis's way of apologizing for a particularly difficult tour. "He gave me that guitar after a show where he'd collapsed backstage," Burton reveals. "When he handed it to me, he said, 'I'm sorry I keep putting you through this, James. You deserve better than babysitting a broken man.'" Burton's most shocking revelation involves the night he almost quit the TCB band. It wasn't because of the music or the money. It was because he couldn't watch his friend destroy himself anymore, while everyone around them pretended it was normal. But what Burton witnessed during Elvis's final weeks goes even deeper than stage struggles and manipulation. What he's about to reveal about August 1977 will expose the most tragic failure in rock and roll history. The last conversation James Burton had with Elvis Presley wasn't on stage in Indianapolis. It was a phone call 3 weeks before Elvis died. A call that Burton has never revealed to anyone, not even in 47 years of interviews about his friend. "Elvis called me at 2 in the morning on July 26th, Burton reveals. He was crying, not just upset, sobbing like a child. He said, 'James, I think I'm dying, and nobody cares enough to stop it.' That phone call lasted 4 hours. Elvis poured out fears, regrets, and desperate pleas that Burton kept secret until now. Elvis wasn't just talking about physical death. He was talking about the death of everything he used to be. He told me he'd been having chest pains for weeks, but every time he mentioned it, people would just hand him more pills. He said, 'They're not trying to help me get better, James. They're trying to keep me functional until I can't function anymore.'" Burton begged Elvis to cancel his upcoming tour dates and check into a real hospital, not the celebrity-friendly facilities that had failed him before. Elvis's response broke Burton's heart. He said, "James, I owe too many people too much money. If I stop working, everyone around me loses everything. I can't be responsible for destroying all these lives." Even dying, Elvis was more worried about other people than himself. But Elvis revealed something during that call that Burton believes could have saved his life, if anyone had listened. Elvis told Burton he'd been secretly meeting with a doctor in Memphis who wanted to help him get clean. But Colonel Parker had found out and threatened to sue the doctor for interfering with business. Elvis said he'd found someone who actually cared about his health, not his career. This doctor had a plan to gradually reduce the medication safely, but the colonel shut it down. He told Elvis that getting clean would ruin his voice and end his career. "And all I could think about was Elvis calling me that last time, begging me not to let them lie about who he really was. I realized I'd been doing exactly what he asked me not to do. I'd been protecting the lie." Burton's near-death experience changed everything. He realized that his decades of silence hadn't protected Elvis's memory. It had protected the people who killed him. "I kept quiet because I thought that's what friends do. But friends don't let other friends get away with murder. And what happened to Elvis was murder. Slow, calculated, profitable murder.
At 85, Burton no longer fears the lawsuits, the angry phone calls, or the attempts to discredit him. He's survived strokes, cancer, and a pandemic. What's left to scare him? Colonel Parker is dead. Most of the Memphis Mafia is dead. The people who could have stopped Elvis's death but chose money instead, they're mostly gone. I'm not protecting anyone anymore except the truth. Burton's decision to speak now isn't just about clearing his conscience. It's about preventing history from repeating itself with other artists trapped in similar situations. Look around today, Burton says. How many young musicians are struggling with the same problems Elvis had? Prescription drugs, enablers, people making money off their pain. Nothing's changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. Burton reveals he's been contacted by family members of other deceased musicians, people who recognize the same patterns he witnessed with Elvis. They've shared stories that sound tragically familiar, talented artists surrounded by people who prioritized profit over health. A woman called me last year. Her son was a famous rapper who died from prescription drugs. She said, "Mr. Burton, they did to my boy exactly what they did to Elvis." That's when I knew I had to speak up. Burton's most explosive revelation involves ongoing legal battles with Elvis's estate. He claims representatives have contacted him multiple times over the years, offering substantial payments for his continued silence about certain aspects of Elvis's final years. "They've offered me enough money to set up my great-grandchildren for life," Burton reveals. "All I had to do was sign something saying I'd never discuss Elvis's prescription drug use or the people who enabled it. Blood money. That's what they were offering me. Blood money." Burton refused every offer, but he's deeply disturbed by what those attempts reveal about the ongoing efforts to sanitize Elvis's legacy. They're still trying to control the story, still trying to make Elvis's death seem like some mysterious tragedy instead of the preventable disaster it was. They're more concerned about protecting their investment than honoring his memory.
Burton's message to Elvis's family, particularly his daughter Lisa Marie, before her own tragic death, was simple. Your father was a good man trapped in a bad situation. The people who should have saved him failed him. Don't let them rewrite that history. Burton also reveals shocking details about Elvis's unreleased final recordings, sessions that he claims expose just how deteriorated Elvis had become. There are recordings from 1977 that will never see the light of day because they show how sick Elvis really was. His voice breaking, forgetting lyrics, needing multiple takes for simple songs. The estate will never release them because they destroy the myth. Burton's warning about how history remembers legends is urgent and personal. He's watched as Elvis's story has been sanitized, romanticized, and commercialized until the real man has almost disappeared entirely. Elvis deserves better than being turned into a cartoon character or a tragic figure. He was a human being who made mistakes, got sick, and died because the people around him cared more about money than his life. That's the truth, and the truth matters. At 85, James Burton isn't looking for fame, money, or vindication. He's looking for something simpler and more profound. The chance to honor his friend by finally telling the truth about how he lived and why he died. James Burton risked everything to tell this truth. Now it's up to us to share it before it's buried again. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with everyone who needs to hear what really happened to the king of rock and roll.
I had just got, I was trying to get a record deal, and I'd just been turned down by Capitol in Nashville. Very, very famous Rat Pack producer, the guy who produced the Rat Pack, Jimmy Bowen, had just turned me down and said,
It's 3 months after Toby Keith's death, and his daughter Shelley is standing in his garage, holding a cardboard box that's about to shatter everything she thought she knew about her father. The box is unmarked, tucked behind his vintage car collection, and when she opens it, she finds something that makes her call her brothers immediately. "You need to get over here right now," she tells them, her voice shaking. "Dad wasn't who we thought he was." Now you have to understand something about Toby Keith. This was a man who built his entire career on being exactly what you saw. the red, white, and blue cowboy. The guy who'd put a boot in your ass if you messed with America. He wore his toughness like armor, never showed weakness, never backed down from a fight. For 40 years, that's who Toby Keith was to the world. And honestly, that's who his family thought he was too. But Shelley's standing there in that garage, staring at documents that don't make any sense. Bank records showing massive transfers to accounts she's never heard of. Names and addresses of people she doesn't recognize. Receipts for payments that have nothing to do with music, nothing to do with business, nothing to do with anything she can explain. Her brother Stellan arrives first, takes one look at what she's found, and his face goes white. Then Crystal shows up, and suddenly all three of Toby's kids are sitting on the garage floor, surrounded by boxes they never knew existed, trying to piece together a puzzle that doesn't fit the man they buried. Because here's what they're looking at. Evidence that their father had been living a completely double life. Not affairs, not business deals, not anything scandalous in the way you'd expect. Something much more shocking than that. The first document Shelley pulls out is a handwritten list in her father's unmistakable scrawl. Names, addresses, dollar amounts. Some entries go back 20 years. The amounts range from a few $1,000s to six figures, and next to each entry, there's a note. Surgery successful. House saved. Kids can stay in school. Stellan finds a folder marked private. Destroy after my death. Inside are letters Toby had written but never sent, explanations for payments he'd made, and detailed instructions for his assistant about maintaining secrecy around certain transactions. The letterhead on some of these documents shows business names none of his children had ever heard of. But it's Crystal who finds the document that changes everything. It's a legal agreement, signed just 6 months before Toby's death, establishing what appears to be a massive charitable trust. The funding amount listed makes all three siblings go silent. We're talking about a number so large that it represents a significant portion of their father's entire estate. None of them had any idea this trust existed.
The man who sang "Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue" and "Beer for My Horses." The guy who seemed to wear his heart on his sleeve and never held back his opinions about anything, had apparently been operating an entire secret life of generosity that he'd hidden from everyone, including his own family. Shelley starts crying first, but not from sadness, from confusion, from shock, from realizing that the father she thought she knew completely was apparently just one layer of who Toby Keith really was. They keep digging through the boxes, and every document they find makes the picture more confusing and more incredible. There are thank you letters from people they've never heard of, expressing gratitude for help during medical emergencies, financial crises, family tragedies. Letters addressed to various business names and P.O. boxes, never directly to Toby Keith. The most jarring part? Many of these letters are from people who had no idea who was actually helping them. They're thanking anonymous donors, mysterious benefactors, charitable organizations they'd never heard of before receiving help. Stellan finds a notebook where Toby had apparently kept track of everything. Each entry is dated, with details about why someone needed help and how he arranged to provide it without being discovered. Some entries span years, showing ongoing support for families through extended hardships. But what they found wasn't just shocking. It revealed a side of Toby Keith that nobody, not even his closest friends, ever knew existed. What Toby's kids discovered in that garage wasn't just random acts of kindness. It was a sophisticated operation that had been running for over 2 decades, designed specifically to hide Toby Keith's involvement in helping people who were desperate and had nowhere else to turn. The system was brilliant in its complexity. Toby had created multiple shell companies with names like Red Dirt Relief and Oklahoma Hearts Foundation. He'd hired a small team of people whose only job was to identify families in crisis and quiet. Take Michael Rodriguez.
a Marine who lost both legs in Afghanistan. Michael's family was about to lose their house because his disability payments weren't enough to cover the mortgage on their specially modified home. The bank was 2 weeks away from foreclosure. Then suddenly, an anonymous donor paid off their entire mortgage through something called the Veterans Home Security Trust. Michael and his wife spent years trying to figure out who saved their house. They never found out it was the guy who sang American Soldier. Or consider Sarah Chen, a single mother in Tulsa whose 8-year-old daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. Sarah's insurance covered the basic treatment, but not the experimental therapy that could save her daughter's life. The treatment cost over $300,000, money Sarah would never have in her lifetime. 3 days before the deadline to start treatment, Sarah got a call from something called Children's Medical Angels, telling her the full cost had been covered by an anonymous donor. Sarah's daughter is alive today because of Toby Keith, and she has no idea. But here's where it gets really incredible. Toby wasn't just writing checks. He was actively involved in people's lives for years at a time, monitoring their situations, providing ongoing support as needed. The documents show families he supported through multiple crises over decades. There's the Johnson family from Oklahoma City. First, Toby helped when the father lost his job at the oil refinery and they were facing eviction. 2 years later, when their teenage son was accepted to college but couldn't afford tuition, mysterious scholarship money appeared. When their grandmother needed expensive heart surgery 5 years after that, Oklahoma Community Care covered the costs. 3 separate crises spanning 7 years, all handled by Toby Keith through different fake organizations, so the family would never suspect it was the same person helping them. The financial records show Toby was spending millions of dollars a year on this operation. And we're not talking about tax write-offs or publicity stunts. These payments were structured specifically to provide no benefit to Toby whatsoever. No tax advantages, no public recognition, no business connections that could help his career. His accountant had apparently tried to talk him out of this system multiple times, suggesting he could get more impact and better tax benefits by donating through established charities. Toby refused. He wanted to help people directly, immediately, without bureaucracy or delays. When someone needed help, he wanted them to get it within days, not months. The most shocking discovery was a thick folder labeled Musicians in Crisis. Inside were records showing Toby had secretly funded the careers of dozens of struggling songwriters and performers. He'd pay for their demo recordings, cover their rent during tough months, even fund their tours, all through various fake management companies and investment groups. Some of these musicians went on to have successful careers and still have no idea that Toby Keith was their anonymous benefactor during their darkest moments. One case involved a young songwriter from Nashville who was about to give up and move back home to work in his father's hardware store. The day before he was supposed to leave, he got a call from Music City Development Partners, offering to fund his next year in Nashville, including studio time and living expenses. That songwriter went on to write multiple #1 hits. He spent years trying to figure out who believed in him when nobody else would. The total amount Toby had secretly given away was staggering. According to the documents his children found, he'd quietly donated over $40 million across 23 years, helping hundreds of families through their worst moments. But this wasn't even the most shocking part of what his family discovered. Deep in the final box, Shelley finds something that makes her sit down hard on the concrete floor. It's a stack of handwritten letters, each one sealed in an envelope with a name written in her father's handwriting. The first envelope simply says, "To my dad," in Toby's unmistakable scrawl. Inside is a letter Toby wrote to his father, who had died years earlier. But this isn't a memorial tribute or a nostalgic remembrance. It's Toby explaining himself, defending choices his father never understood, apologizing for arguments they'd had about money and success and what it means to be a man. "Dad, you always said I was too soft, that I'd never make it in this business because I cared too much about what other people thought. the letter reads. But you were wrong about what I cared about. I never cared. There's a letter addressed to the critics that Toby apparently wrote during one of his most controversial periods, when he was being attacked for his political views and his aggressive patriotic songs. Instead of the defiant response you'd expect from the public Toby Keith, this letter is introspective, almost vulnerable. You think you know who I am because of the songs I sing and the image I project, he wrote. But every dollar I made from those songs you hate went to help people you'll never meet. Every time you called me a warmonger, I was paying for a veteran's medical bills. Every time you said I was just pandering for money, I was giving that money away to families in crisis. I built this tough guy image because it sold records, and I needed those records to sell so I could afford to help more people. But the letter that breaks Shelley's heart is addressed to my fellow cancer patients. Toby had written it during his own battle with stomach cancer, and it reveals how isolated he felt, how much he wanted to connect with others going through the same struggle, but how his celebrity status made that impossible. I wanted to sit in those support group circles and just be another scared guy facing the unknown, he wrote. But I couldn't, because I wasn't just another guy. I was Toby Keith, and that meant everyone treated me differently, like I was somehow stronger or braver than the rest of you. The truth is, I was just as terrified as anyone else. Maybe more, because I had to pretend I wasn't. Then Crystal finds the folder that changes everything they thought they knew about their father's final years. It's labeled The Foundation, Launch After Death, and contains detailed plans for something called the Anonymous Angels Foundation. The documents show that Toby had been planning to reveal his secret charitable work after his death, but not in the way you'd expect. Instead of taking credit for what he'd already done, he wanted to create a foundation that would formalize his approach to anonymous giving. The foundation would be funded by... But here's the part that stunned his children the most. Toby had been secretly collaborating with other celebrities on charitable efforts for years. The documents show a network of musicians, actors, and athletes who had been quietly coordinating to help people, sharing information about families in need, and pooling resources for larger emergencies. Names that would shock you, working together behind the scenes while maintaining completely different public images. The final item in the folder is a thick envelope marked, "For my children, open only after you found everything else." Inside are 3 separate letters, one for each of his kids, explaining why he kept his charitable work secret from everyone, including them. The letter to Shelley reads, "I needed you to love me for who I was, not what I could give away. I needed to know that my family's respect was based on how I treated you, not how much money I gave to strangers. I was afraid that if you knew about this, you'd see it as proof that I cared more about helping other people than I did about being present for my own family." What his family decided to do with this information would either honor his wishes or change everything. For 3 days after discovering their father's secret life, Toby's children couldn't agree on what to do. Shelley wanted to honor his wishes completely, keep everything secret, maybe quietly continue his charitable work without ever revealing his involvement. Stellan felt they owed it to the world to show who their father really was, that people deserved to know the truth about the man behind the music. Crystal was torn between both perspectives, understanding the weight of either decision. They brought in Patricia, Toby's longtime assistant, who had been the keeper of his secrets for over 2 decades. She told them something that changed their entire perspective on the situation. "Your father knew you'd find all of this," Patricia revealed. "He wanted you to find it. He could have destroyed these records, had everything handled through lawyers with confidentiality agreements that would have kept this secret forever. But he didn't. He left everything." They revealed enough of Toby's secret charitable work to show the world that he was more complex than his public image suggested. But they didn't release the names of the families he'd helped, or the specific details that would embarrass the people who had received his assistance. They launched the Anonymous Angels Foundation exactly as Toby had planned, but they did it in his name, making it clear that this was his vision and his funding. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of families came forward to share their stories about mysterious help they'd received during their darkest moments. Veterans whose medical bills had been paid by unknown donors. Musicians who'd been saved from giving up their dreams by anonymous benefactors. Families who'd had their mortgages paid off during financial crises by charitable organizations they'd never heard of before. Each story painted the same picture. Toby Keith had been quietly, systematically helping people for decades, always making sure they never knew it was him. But the revelation that completely reframed everything happened 3 weeks after they made their decision public. A package arrived at Shelley's house with no return address, containing a letter from a nurse who had worked at the children's cancer ward where Toby had received his own treatment. The letter explained that during Toby's chemotherapy sessions, when he was at his weakest and most vulnerable, he would ask about other patients who we were struggling financially with our treatment costs. The nurse initially thought he was just making conversation to distract himself from his own situation. But then she started noticing that families who had been facing impossible medical bills were suddenly getting help from anonymous donors within days of Toby asking about them. Mr. Keith was using his own cancer treatment as an opportunity to identify more people he could help, the nurse wrote. Even while he was fighting for his own life, he was worried about other families who couldn't afford to fight for theirs. I've worked in cancer treatment for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like it. This final revelation showed that Toby's secret charitable work wasn't just something he did.
Sometimes the people who seem the toughest on the outside are carrying the biggest hearts on the inside. If Toby's story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible, untold stories about the hidden lives of the people we think we know. What other celebrities do you think might be living secret lives of generosity? Let me know in the comments.